Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Nathan Reacts, where today I finally found some free time. This is gonna come out immediately after I post what was the other video again? It was the Obscure Marines video by Pancreas. Because I completely forgot about it. I thought I had already posted it. I guess I didn't actually post, which is crazy. Um, I think what happened is that I was going to get back to it just to come over it for whatever reason, and that I forgot, and at some point, right, I guess I just assumed that I had already posted. I don't know. It's a little weird. I have been like so preoccupied with my work that I've ended up like coming back home sleeping instead and all that, among other things. It's interesting. But yeah, I have some time finally. I've pretty much caught up on most of my work at my job, to be honest, and so I'm literally bored to tears when I'm there, so I have more energy to work with now to basically do a reaction at the very least. So yeah, video is Raven Guard, the coolest Marines that no one cares about. Warhammer 40k lore by Crack Duck, or is it Crack Duke? I have no idea. So, I'm not too sure what this channel. I know this channel covers a lot of Warhammer stuff. I'm not too familiar with most of his content. He just usually talks about a lot of different legions, different chapters, different factions. Like he talks about a lot of stuff Warhammer related. And I thought I'd give this video a go, considering that it's a video about the Raven Guard, and the Raven Guard are kind of interesting. I've been wanting to do a bit of a lore dive on them at some point, and because they're one of the few factions. Well, not few factions. I think the Emperor's Children is another faction that I don't know too much about. Actually, I'm pretty sure, given that I can't think of anything. But yeah, Raven Guard, one of the factions that I don't know about too much, at least none of the specifics. So I'm kind of interested to see what this video is going to have in store for me. But yeah. I guess without further ado, let's just go ahead and get right into it. Let's just go
This
get right
video is
into it.
sponsored by Incogni.
Oh, yeah, almost forgot. Don't forget to like, subscribe, go support the original video. Christ, almost forgot about that. All right. Yeah, please go like, subscribe, maybe leave a comment down below for the original video. Support your boy. Support Crack Duck or Crack Duke. I have no idea how you pronounce his name. I'm just gonna call him Crack.
This video is sponsored by Incogni.
So I'm gonna assume that
Today
it's
we're
just duck.
talking about everyone's favorite legion, the Word Bearers. What was that? It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's awesome Primarch of the Raven Guard, Corvus Corax. Whoopee! Phew, I didn't know how much longer I could act like Lorgar was a stand-up guy. But yes, today we're talking about the super cool emo boys, masters of stealth, jump pack, and lightning claw aficionados, the Raven Guard. These guys are super cool and don't get the attention they deserve, which, honestly, they'd probably prefer. So, if you want stealthy, reasonable Marines who have a healthy amount of Space Marine flair, let's talk Raven Guard. The Raven Guard's claim to fame is their mastery of stealth, which it may seem a bit silly to imagine a 7-foot monster man in giant power armor tiptoeing around, but it's also terrifying to imagine a 7-foot monster man in giant power armor
Oh, bad.
being able to tiptoe around and striking without warning. The Raven Guard learned how to be masters of stealth and guerrilla warfare from their Primarch Corvus Corax. Young Corax crash landed on the prison moon of Kievar called Lycaeus, and he was discovered by a girl named Natsuri. She and the slaves believed the strange boy to be special, so they hid the young Primarch from the tyrannical Kievarian overlords. Also, the prisoners of Lycaeus weren't necessarily some heinous criminals, as most were actually arrested for opposing the rule of the tyrannical and cruel Kievarian overlords.
there's some details here that are just kind of getting skimmed
tyrannical
over.
and cruel Kiadvarian overlords. The Slaves were actually arrested for opposing the rule of the tyrannical and cruel Kiadvarian overlords.
Could just hit that. That's right, I got error keys for this too. Didn't like being oppressed by a tyrannical government. Punishment, oppressed by a tyrannical government. This time as a slave. Talk about the punishment. Yeah.
The slaves believed Korax to be their savior and named him the Deliverer, which is coincidentally the same thing I call my Amazon guy. As a child,
What a
Korax
dad
was
joke.
taught leadership as well as the arts of urban warfare, close combat fighting, demolition, and stealth. And being a magic space baby, he learned fast and mastered everything needed to eventually stage an uprising. To prepare for an eventual revolt, Korax and his slaves gathered weapons and supplies, coordinated their forces, and trained. Korax launched a number of precision strikes and strategic raids to destabilize the planet, and then he launched ambushes on the disoriented Lycaeus Defense Force. He continued his guerrilla campaign against the Kiadvarian overlords, masterfully striking from the shadows, and he finally defeated his oppressors using a combination of stealth, cunning, and these 5 nuclear bombs that he found, definitively proving that the ultimate stealth technique is huge explosions. But joking aside, he did cleverly use his
I mean, to be fair, wouldn't it be perfect stealth if there was no one around to live to tell about it? I think he might be cooking with that one.
learned skills to get these nuclear bombs and, more importantly, get them to detonate in key locations. So he's not really a dumb.
Notably, he ended up killing many innocents to liberate the planet. This kind of explains some of the things he does later on. Interesting.
Boom boom Primarch like half of his brothers. But thanks to Korax, the tyrannical tech guilds collapsed and millions rejoiced with their newfound freedom. Afterwards, the moon was renamed Deliverance to honor Korax, and as they were celebrating their freedom from their oppressive rulers, the Emperor of Mankind arrived to meet Korax. And now, for no reason at all, here's a diction.
Talk about timing. I guess it's better than fucking Angrons. I think anything is better than Angrons, let's be honest. I mean, Mortarion kind of got a bit shafted a little bit too, but he was more so deprived of his ability and desire to commit patricide, among other things. But you know, that's neither here or there. You know, my memory serves. But otherwise, the Emperor has quite the he has a lot of issues, and a lot of his issues are primarily just how he deals with his sons, and not so much in the way he ends up dealing with them, but more so just like the approach he takes. Like, it doesn't, like, the timing isn't as important as what he does when he actually like gets there and meets them, because he really could have handled a lot of the situations a hell of a lot better. I still think the funniest meeting I've heard thus far is between him and sorry, I got distracted for a second. Was the meeting between him and Leman Russ, like their sort of like challenge, their sort of competitive bouts of engaging in just the funniest competitions is really hilarious. Fucking Leman Russ can drink the Emperor under a table. That detail is kind of funny to me. It's actually made them more funnier because it was more so like a speed drinking competition than anything else, because they were working with limited supplies and Leman Russ just drank the entire bar, whereas the Emperor was still finishing like I think a keg or two, which is hilarious. But yeah, there's a lot of funny things that kind of go into the setting, and none of the stories ever told are the samey. They're always uniquely different, and that's probably because they hire different writers for different things. They probably hired a different writer to write the Space Wolves than they did with the Angron story, which that would be the more intelligent thing to do, right? That'd be the most prudent thing to do, right? You know, like you want to give the setting a bit more flavor. You know, have different writers come in to tell the stories of the different legions and factions. It makes perfect sense to me. But otherwise, yeah, you know, the Emperor has a really funny way of just kind of getting in the way of every little thing that his sons get up to. But yeah, I rambled enough.
Dictionary definition of irony. But before getting any further, do you wish that you could stealthily hide your personal information on that spooky place, the internet? Well, if so, Incogni would be perfect for you. Incogni very helpfully removes your personal information from data broker sites. Data broker sites can be quite dangerous. Malicious ones may weaponize your personal information to carry out scary things like scams, identity theft, and those gosh darn scam likely calls. Creepily, there can be hundreds of sites that have your
Except for YouTube, I guess, because YouTube will just. I mean, like, if they flag your channel, you're gonna have to prove yourself regardless. Though, granted, I did pay for premium on this fucking account, so if nothing else, right? Hopefully, right? Hopefully, they'll never ask me for. They'll never ask me to prove my age for any reason. And I'm pretty sure as soon as I paid for it, I immediately deleted the information off of this platform. You know, and I probably should check that, just to be doubly sure. But yeah, you know, it's I don't understand platforms and their need to do certain things. I've also been kind of debating about the kick thing now recently the because of the situation that's happened with the other with a streamer who got literally unalived due to some bullying. It's that's a story that's circling around right now, and I'm not too sure how to feel about that. I mean, granted, a lot of platforms have their own individual problems, but I feel like that one's a little weird. I feel like that one's a little weird. But I've also been hearing that there's a toxicity issue with Kick, but I don't know too much about that. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of toxicity on a lot of platforms. I mean, to be real, to be frank. But the fact that I think it was who was it? It was Upper Echelon who made a video about that. I haven't watched it, but like depending, I'm gonna probably end up watching it at some point, and depending on what he has to say about it, I might think about it a little bit more, especially with recent events. But I definitely still would not mind streaming both on Kick and YouTube. It seems like a pretty appropriate thing for me to do, but I don't know, just to diversify my like the eggs a little bit, just to kind of like not put all of my eggs in one basket, so to speak, but just to kind of diversify my, kind of get my ducks in order, kind of like diversify my investments, among other things. Anyways, I kind of paused in the middle of an ad. My bad.
information. There were a scary amount of sites with a lot of my personal information easily available just for my name. But now, after using Incogni for a while, they've taken my data off over 400 sites, and I really have to dig deep to find any with my information, which is very nice. Best of all, though, I
I
basically
could
had to
probably
do
use that
nothing
myself,
to
to be
get this
honest.
taken down. Once given permission from you, Incogni goes out and does everything needed to remove your personal information from these gosh darn data brokers. It saves a lot of time as you don't have to deal with the annoyance of data broker websites intentionally making a long, arduous process to get your information taken down. Also, if you come across a site before Incogni gets to it, you can use their new custom removal feature to send a custom request for them to take care of it. So, if you're interested, click the link in the description, incogni.com/crackduck, and use the promo code crackduck to get a 60% off on the annual plan. Thank you, Incogni, for sponsoring this video. But anyways, Korax was convinced of the Emperor's cause as the Emperor promised to help liberate Kievar. With the Emperor's help, Korax and the boys liberated Kievar, and it was converted to a Mechanicus Forge world and continues to supply the Raven Guard to this day. And Korax was highly loyal to and continues to supply the Raven.
Igavar became a mini Forge world that supplies the Raven Guard and makes special STC mods befitting of their combat doctrines. That seems pretty cool. I don't know if I just read that right, though.
Guard to this day.
Kievar. Oh no, it's Kievar.
Korax
That's
was
right. He said
highly
that.
loyal to the Emperor and respected his father. Which, having hindsight of the Emperor's actions and the Imperium, you might think that Mr. Corvus, I hate tyranny, Korax was a bit hypocritical. But the Emperor is a very convincing guy. Unironically, the Emperor's magic aura intact won Corvus over as he presented himself as humanity's only salvation.
And to be honest, from all I've read, I think he, the Emperor, legitimately did want to save humanity at all costs in his own misguided way, so he didn't necessarily have to lie to Korax. Yeah, I get that same feeling too. Like, I still go with the, I still am going with the idea. All right, I'm still operating under my own sort of like, I wouldn't say my own sort of like idea, but definitely my own thesis that he is very much the embodiment of humankind's hope. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of it a lot. Like, he is just hope personified by humanity. You know, kind of like how Slanesh is a chaos god that was born from the abject fucking, like, just debauchery, excess, and all the crazy shit that went into that by the Eldar. I feel like at the lowest point possible, you know, the Emperor was very much spawned out of a need and desire for something to come and save humanity. But, you know, that could also just, you know, because there is actual some documents that suggest that the Emperor does have an actual history, you know, other than just being, you know, just showing up out of nowhere on Terra. Like, he clearly does have a history in some lores bits here and there. Like, there's some that document him as being like a farm boy from as far back as like the fucking BC era, whereas there's even some other documents saying that he is the creation of a coven of witches or some such. You know, there's all kinds of things that float around about the Emperor's origins, but at the end of the day, nothing is truly legitimized. So you can certainly come up with your own interpretation. I like the idea. I like my idea a lot more because it's still because it makes him seem more like a force of nature that exists primarily for his own means and objectives that operate beyond our comprehension or understanding because he operates under the will of humanity and not so much his own, which I think that makes him more interesting as a character, but I don't know. You know, like, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. I don't know. I feel like that makes him a pretty compelling character because at least that way he's not just it not only makes him more nebulous, but it also grounds him a bit more into being like, well, then it makes him just a tad bit more predictable in the sense that you know what he's firmly about and not just like what kind of things go through the mind of this caricature that wants to help uplift humanity, right? I don't know.
Plus, Korax truly deeply believed that he bore witness to the Emperor's truest self and that the Emperor was not a tyrant, as his conquest and cruelty were not to win power, but were rather a necessary and coldly logical step in ensuring humanity's power, but were rather a necessary.
The Emperor would often appear more vulnerable when speaking to Korax, theoretically closer to his true self than the larger than life god Emperor look. Additionally, to Korax, the Emperor seems to only do cruel things because it is his tragic duty to save humanity, even if it means sacrificing his own humanity. Much like how Korax had to nuke innocents in order to save the many, Korax also seemed to believe the Emperor would relinquish his control over humanity once he united them and brought salvation, making his conquest temporary. I think that's a pretty sound and apt explanation. I feel like that makes sense, even for Korax. I feel like that kind of makes sense. Yeah, I feel like that makes sense. Like, you have to, you know what they say in that one Fat Electrician video? Some people have to do bad things for terrific reasons, right? And I feel like these are just characters who are just trying to make the best out of a bad situation. They're doing bad things for terrific reasons. I feel like it's just another great example of that.
Necessary and coldly logical step in
Not saying this is true, but Korax does have a narrative reason for siding with the Emperor despite his anti-tyrant look.
ensuring humanity's survival. Korax didn't
I
fully
dig
agree
it.
with the Emperor's actions, but he did trust that they would culminate in the survival of mankind, and when the long night was
Korax planned to work on bettering the quality of life for Imperial citizens after the Great Crusade reunited humanity. Well, that's nice. So he wasn't just like a cold uh he wasn't just like a very cold, calculating, very what's the word to describe? Very he wasn't a harbinger of death, so to speak, right? Is basically the way to put that. He wasn't a cold, calculating harbinger of death who wanted to bring the demise and defeat of his enemies in the name of the Emperor. He did things as he thought would help to expedite the process of bringing about unity and then bringing humanity to a point to where we could actually get some level of stability. I can kind of see that. I do.
Over, he could work to better
That
people's
was kind of the
lives.
point of the
Plus,
Crusades,
not
anyways.
even he could foresee the mess that the Imperium would eventually devolve into.
Oh God,
Anyways,
no.
though, reunited with his legion, Korax
I mean, nobody could have predicted that. No, none of the Primarchs could. Maybe except for the Chaos ones, but even then, the Traitor and the Chaos Primarchs, you know, had very clear and obvious reasons why they rebelled. The I think the thing that is really funny is that we've had the Lion come back, we've had Rabute come back. We're having debates about which Primarch would come back next if there was another Primarch to return to the setting, and I think that Gilliman's reaction to the state of the Imperium 10,000 years later is a very interesting one because you know, I too would be really feeling the weight of and pressure of just the absolute state of things if I was in his position. I'd be a tad bit melancholic, you know. I might even I might even get a little tad, frustrated, perhaps a little bit defeatist about the situation. You know, it just seems like we're because the Imperium at the current state of things is currently out on decline. Everything's just slowly decaying, and there doesn't seem to be a quick and easy fix for it because it's a death by 1,000 cuts. Like you're not gonna fix this thing overnight. It's gonna take at least a century before we can actually get the ball rolling again. And even then, despite Rabute being a very clear and obvious choice for being the leader at the helm of the Imperium, who probably has a better chance of keeping things going than anybody else, like I think even he would be hard pressed to be asked to fix this sinking ship in a way that helps to bring it back to what it was prior to the heresy. God, I think that's a big, tall ask, to be sure. But yeah, I think if there was a way to bring in one of the Chaos Primarchs back, like I think you could technically say that Fulgrim came back to the setting, but a clone of his came back to it kind of brought him into the setting, not so much Fulgrim himself, right? And I think that the clone Fulgrim storyline is something I want to revisit at some point because that's just a very interesting one. Like I've seen like a video talk about it, but I actually want to kind of delve into that a bit more. I think I'll do that for a video too, as a matter of fact. Maybe I'll do a reaction video about it, like the clone Fulgrim that like that kind of returned to the setting and was kind of it'd be kind of an interesting one to cover. But enough of my ramblings.
deeply loved and cared for his sons and taught them the arts of stealth as well as his core values. Originally, the 19th were cold and cruel oppressors, but Korax quickly reprimanded this behavior as he despised oppressors and tyrants. So, Korax taught his legion to be liberators and beacons of hope to the oppressed and hapless. Along with this, he invented the Rites of Shadow and later the Trifold Path after this Dropsite massacre, both of which were meant to guide his sons to be the warriors he wanted them to be. The Rites of Shadow is essentially a ritual to test a Marine's conviction and character. It is completely silent to maintain secrecy, as it is performed using the Raven Guard sign language of Corspeak. And this ritual is still done in the present setting, and those who pass are given the honorary title of Shadow added to their rank, i.e., Shadow Captain or Shadow Sergeant.
Neat.
And then the Trifold Path are the three tenets of victory that Korax taught his sons. These reflect the Raven Guard's fighting style and were deeply important to the Legion in later chapter. The three pillars of the path are ambush, stealth, and vigilance. Korax taught that mastery of one path made victory possible, mastery of two makes victory likely, and mastery of all three makes victory inevitable. And in the current setting, the Raven Guard 3rd, 4th, and 5th Company are dedicated to one of the three principles, and once their respective skill is mastered, a Marine is able to be promoted to a new company to master the next. Most
So I think one thing I'm going to need to investigate is Space Marine companies in different sort of company captains among other things, because I feel like that like there's obviously a difference between one company to another, but I'm not sure what the differences are between different legions, because that would be an interesting thing to study, right? Because I feel like that the like the Ultramarines definitely have since they have their own like they have like a few different companies, but I'm not too sure what the other companies are about and what the Ultramarines tend to focus on majoritively. They could just be different companies based on different tactics and strategies in terms of how they're utilized. Like one might be more specialized in bombardments, the other one might be more based on a ground troop related thing, or one might entirely focus on like dreadnought maintenance and just dreadnought foundry work among other things, right? It could be like it could be a lot of things, right? Or it could just be entirely based off of tactics, like right? Like there could be like space marine captains who focus primarily on the infiltration tactics, among other things. And some other ones might be more better at frontline war zone, like ground, boots to the ground type of tactics, right? Just straight up assault tactics. And among other things, right? I feel like that the next thing I should definitely look into is the difference between different companies within specific chapters, and if there's really a major difference between one company from another, or if they're just like different companies that led by different leaders that have different focuses or something of that caliber, right? And that would also kind of make the story of Titus more interesting because he was a captain once. So I kind of wonder what like Titus would have probably focused on, or what particular um his particular company would be specialized in that regard. But yeah, something to think about.
Raven Guard are masters of at least one, but few are truly masters of all three like their father before them. Also, fun fact, the Trifold Path was made by Korax to help with his son's depression. You see, Raven Guard have a genetic default that causes something called the Sable Brand in some Marines. This is basically a super depression where the Marine is temporarily haunted by the voice of the dead, gets depressed and nihilistic, and then goes a bit insane. This leads to afflicted Marines fighting with little self preservation, and they just kick ass until there's no more ass left to kick, or they die. So, yeah, basically, it's a murder depression. Anyways, though, the Raven Guard were known for being an efficient and uncompromising
That sounds
legion.
kind of
They
sad,
quickly
actually.
liberated planets and then put them under Imperial rule. Also, straight up, of all the legions, the Raven Guard tactics make the most sense for the Space Marines. It simply doesn't really make sense for a resource intensive super soldier with a very limited population to be engaging in giant open field clashes, perfectly open to artillery strikes, orbital barrages, or just good old mass firepower. But even though it doesn't make sense, it's perfectly fine since big old battles are super cool and more fun for a game. But just putting on the boring hat, logically speaking, it does.
Also, not saying I don't want Marines doing big old awesome clashes. Just from a pure boring logical perspective, it makes nonsense. It makes no nonsense to put them in positions they're vulnerable to these things. Interesting. Um. Okay, so is he saying like? Also, not saying I don't want Marines doing big old awesome clashes. Just from a pure boring logical perspective, it makes no sense to put them in positions they're vulnerable to these things. So, okay, yeah, just basically going full force when it makes sense and when it's absolutely necessary. I can get that. I feel like that's following the logic of wanting to not just throw the entire kitchen sink at a problem. Yeah, I can understand that. Like I feel like, especially since there's a whole rule with the marine chapters essentially having to not go over a certain uh limit when it comes to the amount of space marines that could be attributed to a single chapter. I think it makes sense that yeah, you don't want to be throwing your weight and men around too much. But I feel like some chapters would definitely have ways around that. Like, the fact that we have like multiple different successor chapters definitely add a bit more certainly make things a little bit more nebulous in that sense. And I'm sure that when you really think about it also logically, I'm sure that if other chapters wanted to increase their numbers, they just would create other chapters for the sake of having more numbers. I think that makes a lot of sense too, as well. So, yeah, I think that I mean that's the whole idea behind the Genesis chapter, according to Pancreas. So, I think that makes sense. You know, and I kind of thought that even prior to that video as well. Just like there's no better way to rejuvenate more numbers or just to add more numbers to like the at your disposal than just inventing more chapters that could then be given to like someone who is very trustworthy and essentially have them basically command that chapter and then they would be taking orders from you and you could just and you're in the main chapter so that way it makes it much more easier to kind of coordinate attacks among other things as if you're still working like hand in hand among other things. But yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now
Doesn't really make sense for Space
just for a
Marines
bit.
to do the job of a guardsman. The Raven Guard, on the other hand, though, they operate in a way that's probably much more realistic for a fighting force like the Space Marines. The Raven Guard are masters of guerrilla warfare, and they tend to work in relatively small fighting forces called Talons. Each Talon performs a series of operations meant to destabilize, demoralize, weaken, and otherwise bleed their foes. Then, once their enemy is sufficiently weakened, the Talons reconsolidate for a final, overwhelming assault to crush their enemy. As such, they often utilize jump pack assaults, precision drop pod attacks, assassinations, and scout ambushes targeting key locations, commanders, and objectives. The former are especially cool as I'm a huge fan of jump packs and lightning claws. These are nicely on point for their bird theme, as well as being totally badass. In addition, they
I
field
agree.
an unusually small number of tanks and other vehicles. They generally prefer lighter and more agile armor and vehicles. Notably, however, they do make surprisingly good use of the famously heavy Terminator armor. Thanks to its deep strike teleportation abilities, Terminator armor is actually perfect for rapid and powerful ambush assaults against the toughest of foes. But, anyways, looping back to 30k, despite their efficiency in the Great Crusade, tragedy would find them like the hide and seek world champion at an amateur slumber party. Their first massive loss was under the command of War Master Horus Lupercal at the Occam Sothos cluster. Horus commanded the Raven Guard to perform a giant frontal assault against the deadly gate, which it's obviously a stupid idea to send your stealth units to the front lines, especially when you have the melee monster Space Wolves and Siege Master Iron Warriors with you. However, Corax was the newest Primarch to be found at this time, so it was very likely a power move. Anyways,
Huh.
though, Corax of course protested and argued for a more subtle approach, as he would, but eventually he submitted to Horus's authority. And the Raven Guard, of course, took huge casualties. The battle would leave them as the smallest legion and would cause a lifelong resentment towards Horax. Horax, what the fuck? Is that like a slutty Corax? Anyways, though, it would cause a lifelong resentment towards Horus in Corax. However, the silver lining of this was that Corax begrudgingly sent most of his more cruel Terran sons to be killed. So, with that and the great
uh
losses tying them together, the Raven Guard was more unified than ever. However, these losses would pale, no pun intended, in comparison to the next tragedy that would befall the poor old bird boys.
oh,
After
not
Horus
Ishvan
revealed his
5.
heresy at Istvan III, the Raven Guard were part of the retaliation force sent to intercept the Arc Trader on
Wait, 3, that was 5. Yeah, that's a That's a V for five. The Roman numeral. Whatever.
Tragedy that would befall the poor old bird boys. After Horus revealed his heresy at Istvan III, the Raven Guard were part of the retaliation force sent to intercept the Arc Trader on Istvan V. Nearly all
Oh,
of the
okay.
Raven Guard Legion assembled to quell the heresy, and Corax led 80,000 of his sons to fight along 7 of his other brother legions. But it was all a ruse, and 4 out of the 8 legions sent revealed themselves traitor, and the Imperial Fist were unable to make it to the planet. So, the overwhelming Loyalist forces were hit with the Una reverse card as the Raven Guard, Iron Hands, and Salamanders were now hopelessly outnumbered and surrounded in the Urgal Depression. Despite the heroic efforts of the Loyalists, the initial ambush of the secret traitors, and the combined efforts of 7 whole traitor legions led to the near annihilation of the 3 Loyalist legions. Ferrus Manus was killed by Fulgrim, Vulcan was nuked, and their legions were decimated. Actually, even more than decimated. Corax tried evacuating his sons, but he was thwarted. So he did the next best thing and went Insano style, killing all the traitors who stood against him and his legion. Eventually, he killed his way towards that bastard Lorgar, and he thoroughly effed him up. Unfortunately,
Nice.
though, rival emo Conrad Kurz intervened before Corax could kill Lorgar, forcing Corax to retreat. Then, for 80 more
Oh, I remember that detail, and he was surprised by that too, because apparently, fucking Lorgar and shit, I can't even remember his name anymore. Lorgar and Night Lords. Conrad Kurz, there we go. Why did that name elude me, especially when I just heard it? Anyways, yeah, I heard him and Conrad don't get along. Like, I remember hearing specifically that Conrad did not like Lorgar's, like, belief in the Emperor and his religious ways, and so they kind of, like, never really were on the best of footing. So he was utterly surprised to find Conrad, of all people, to come save him and bail him out of that situation. I do remember that. I kind of want to see that story play out. That would be an interesting one to really, like, witness. But yeah, it's an interesting detail.
Ruling days, Corax led his remnant forces in a guerrilla campaign to kill as many traitors as possible and protect their fallen brother's honor as well as survive. And when all hope seemed lost, the Raven Guard who were left to protect Deliverance arrived to rescue their Primarch and remaining brothers. Of the 80,000 Marines, only about 3,000 survived. With this grand betrayal, Corax swore vengeance, but he also lamented to the Emperor in a magic space vision call that he was a failure both to his legion and to the Imperium. Bloodied from Istvan, Corax begged the Emperor to give his blessing.
Specifically, Corax wanted permission to go across the galaxy, killing as many traitors as possible, sacrificing him and his legion to the last man, rather than helping fortify Terra with Dorn. That sounds like a really terrible fucking idea.
To allow Corax and his sons to sacrifice all they had left to kill as many traitors as possible. The Emperor admired Corax's sacrifice and conviction, so he showed Corax his secret gene labs. He entrusted Corax with the tools, knowledge, and permission to improve upon the Space Marine creation process so that he would be able to rapidly rebuild his legion. Which, honestly, is pretty huge as the Emperor isn't often the trusting type, so
yeah, that is true. The Emperor is not a very trusting type. He usually keeps these details to himself. But I feel like, given the situation that they were in, I'm sure the Emperor saw the writing on the wall. He probably imagined that I can't trust anyone better than Corvus to essentially rebuild the Space Marine factions the right way without, some fuck shit happening. But yeah, I can understand why the Emperor would want to be very trusting of Corax in this instance, especially since he seems very genuinely apologetic about his failure in this moment. IMO, the Emperor likes Corax because he seemingly understands the Emperor's stated intentions well and is actually quite similar in ways. Corax perhaps Emperor's goals more than any other Primarch. sympathizes, I'm assuming is what he's trying to say, with the Emperor's goals more than any other Primarch. Korax sees the Great Crusade as a necessary evil in ensuring humanity's future, just as the Emperor sees it. While Korax doesn't agree with all of the Emperor's actions, he does understand why they are done and is sympathetic to the Emperor's actions. Korax himself has committed grave atrocities that bring him great shame in the name of saving humanity in his own way. It's likely that the Emperor respects Korax being able to and willing to do what he believes is necessary for the greater good, even if it means being evil and immoral at times, just like the Emperor does. Plus, Korax does have a knack for gene science, just like his dad. That or the Emperor was manipulating Bird Boy, no one really knows for sure. Yeah, it could be it could be multiple things given the who we're talking about here, but I would definitely like to err on the side that, like, regardless of the intentions, it makes sense that I think the Emperor would want his sons to be able to recuperate their numbers very quickly, especially since they have 9 other legions gunning it for Terra to basically lay siege upon, you know, humanity, and also the go straight to the Emperor's throne room themselves to potentially want to fight and put an end to him. I mean, I feel like this is a very desperate and dangerous situation. Makes sense that he will probably want to be a little bit more liberal with the way he delegates his resources. But yeah.
It shows I had a great deal of respect and trust in Korax. And the madman actually did it. He made Space Marines who were stronger, faster developing, and easier to implant gene seed in, able to make Marines from far younger aspirants like literal 5-year-olds or adults, since the implantation success rates were way higher. With these innovations, Korax was able to make 500 new Marines in a few weeks, which is insane. But
That is
unfortunately,
insane.
those bastards, the Alpha Legion, had to show up and ruin everything. The
Uh,
Alpha Legion, using literal face masks and their signature deception, infiltrated the infiltrators and sabotaged Korax's project with an evil ass demon virus. This caused the new Marines to mutate horribly and also almost destroyed the Raven Guard gene seed entirely, but Korax was able to stop them in the nick of time. This attack, however, left the Raven Guard gene seed permanently damaged, and they now lack Mucranoid and Belcher glands, and their melochromatic organs are also defective. This means that they're a little less resilient than other Marines, can't spit acid, and are able to star in Tim Burton movies. Anyways, though, from all the tragedies that he faced, Korax would have an existential crisis when he went to save the Space Wolves on Uranus. Seeing Leman Russ gravely wounded from his battle with Horus, Korax would lament his own creation, feeling that he and his brothers were never meant to be. And after dramatically monologuing, he would attempt a suicidal last stand with his sons and Bjorn the Fell-Handed's remaining forces in order to redeem his self-proclaimed failed existence. But seeing the arrogant sons of Horus reminded Korax that Horus is asshole and Korax hate. So, due to Horus being a bastard man, Korax realized that he could redeem himself much better by killing a shitload of traitors instead of himself. So, he did a little tactical retreat to regroup his legion, and he led his shadow campaign for the rest of the heresy, striking traitor forces from the shadows and leveraging his dwindling numbers to the best. And then, after the heresy, Korax would mercy kill his mutated sons as they were constantly in pain and insane. He was once again in despair from having to kill his own sons, as well as all the horrible shit that happened in the last 8 years. So he exiled himself to the tallest tower of the Ravenspire, the Eyrie for a Yuri. And after a year of seeking the Emperor's mercy, he left the tower and went into the Eye of Terror to earn his redemption. And now he stalks the warp as a being of literal shadow and darkness. He became in tune with his true nature, mastering his Primarch power of shadows, and took his race slipping ability and name to the max, as he can literally be shadows.
in the story he fights Lorgar, he is explicitly not a demon, nor does he look like a mutant warp monster like people like to say and theorize. He is described as looking like he did in the Heresy, but he is now able to change between a shadow form, a flock of magic super ravens, and his normal human form. He's not a demon or monstrous abomination. He explains that he became in tune with his true nature. As such, he is able to use his warp powers to the fullest, despite not looking like a literal monster. He is still plenty badass and literally shreds word bearers as they shit their power armor trying to call their daddy. I mean, they do describe him as having a more of like a sort of like a bird-like look when he was fighting Lorgar, but I've never read the book myself, to be fair, so I can't really say what the book describes him specifically as. But a lot of people definitely have this interpretation where he basically turned into a humanoid bird-like demon monster thing, which you know, I don't know if that's exactly how he's supposed to look or if that's how it's supposed to be described. I think the fact that it's a bit vague on the details on this is probably the biggest issue here. And they, GW might try to rectify that eh, at some point in the future, but at least make it very clear how this transformation thing works. So, yeah, I guess it's something to look forward to. But hey, whether if he could turn into a giant bird or if he can just use the warp to basically make him more, I guess you could say the warp makes him a lot more bird-like and destructive in that sense. Then yeah, I say that regardless of how it's going, how it might be portrayed or it looks, he's definitely far more elevated than most other Primarchs in the current setting. So, if he ever does make it back to the setting, I definitely would like to see how a Primarch at their prime, at their fullest potential, would absolutely wreck shit on the battlefield. Just completely wreck shit house, just on like without any sort of regard as to how that shit is going to, like, I can't imagine, right? Because I'm trying to think of this, right? I'm trying to think of it, trying to think of how devastating this would be in my mind, and it's like I have no frame of reference because I never played the tabletop game, so I have no idea how that would actually look. But I can imagine in my own mind that he would probably just one man army most legions. Like, given the fact that he's this damn powerful. But, like in a full on war zone, in a full on fight, I imagine there'd be some contention there. But, you know, put him up against another Primarch or even a greater demon, I would be interested to see how he pulls it off. But yeah, that's something that I would like to see at some point in the future. Given that but given that, I think that the more than likely scenario is that Corvus is going to be the next person who returns to the setting. A lot of people hope it's Dorn or somebody else. Like, I think the least likely thing to come back to the setting is Sanguinius, but that's only because of the fact that Sanguinius is fucking dead. But yeah, you know, who, regardless of whoever comes back, it'll be interesting to see the reaction, if nothing else, to what the setting has utterly turned into since, 10,000 years.
And took his race slipping ability and name to the max, as he can literally become a shadow or a murderer of demonic ravens. Notably, he terrorized the Wordbearer's demon world and beat the shit out of Lorgar for a second time, vowing to eventually kill the Primarch once and for all. As for the rest of his legion post-heresy, Corax felt Guilliman was right, and the Raven Guard followed the Codex Astartes to a high level, only second to the Ultramarines. And in the current timeline, the Raven Guard continues to conduct shadow operations to dismantle and destroy their foes, liberating planets from the Heretic and Xenos menace. Also, fun fact, while speaking about liberating planets, they have something called the Moritat Protocol, where a lone marine is sent to a war zone or something to liberate the population. Originally, the Mortats were marines with the Sable brand, and since they had murder depression, Corax gave them a jetpack and some guns and let them go nuts. However, some would go down, train the local population in combat, then go nuts, essentially making them a badass super soldier version of those crazy Liberator pistols. But anyways, the Raven Guard are also notable for being extremely cautious in battle, as they cannot afford to waste their scarce gene seed with the needless deaths of their brothers. As such, in addition to their generally smarter and more tactical approach to battle, the Raven Guard are also extremely strict with their aspirant. The Raven Guard go through great lengths to preserve their gene seed and have some special protocols in place to help with that. For example, they have an abnormally high amount of apothecaries to ensure that when a Marine is killed, as much gene seed as possible is saved. And also, new recruits are held to an extremely high scrutiny in order to ensure only the very best receive Corax's degraded gene seed. This means that the Raven Guard aspirant trials are among the most dangerous, and the ones who are able to ascend to Marines are generally more elite than their cousin chapters, at least at first. In addition, their training as a Marine is extremely thorough, and the Marines are held to a high scrutiny. For example, Raven Guard scouts might serve in the 10th Company for up to a decade, as opposed to the few months that other chapter scouts serve. They also work closely with full-fledged Marines to ensure the best training. But this makes sense as scouts tend to employ tactics that align with the Raven Guard combat doctrines of stealth, ambush, and vigilance. Plus, it's easier to be stealthy in a scout uniform versus the power armor that requires skill and knowledge to move stealthily in. Expanding on that though, skilled Raven Guard Marines know their armor and gear so intimately that they can time their armor's noises to their environment, blending into backgrounds and moving in silence. Some
That's actually pretty dope, to be honest. You become so attuned and accustomed to your armor that you move in motion with your armor rather than against it. That's kind of an interesting detail. That would actually make the stealthing mechanics, like if they were to actually make like a very like almost like a Splinter Cell like game. Well, it's probably going to be more MGS based in terms of gameplay, but it's if they ever do make a stealth 40k game using the Raven Guard, that would be an interesting thing. I seriously fucking doubt they'll ever do it, but that would be an interesting thing. Like, I think they could get it. I think that more than likely they get away with more so preparing ahead of time and just having Marines just chill out comfortably in a location rather than have them sneaky and stealthily infiltrate places and hope they just don't get caught, among other things. But like that's neither here or there. I kind of went on a tangent again, but it's like it's interesting. I like this. I like the Raven Guard. They have an approach to combat that's not something that would be typical for a legion of this kind, but of a faction of this kind. But I like to see how they manage to pull it off, and I like to hear the little details. Right.
especially skilled and talented Marines can even emulate their father's ability to race slip and become almost completely invisible. The ability to race slip isn't
Ooh.
actually a magical power, rather, it's an ability born of extreme skill, awareness, and knowledge. Masters of this skill are able to move so stealthily that they're practically invisible. Which, again, for an 8-foot monster man, being able to move like this is horrifying. But looping back to their aspirants, they draw recruits from their homeworld of Deliverance and its planet of Kievar. In addition, the Raven Guard Marines live up to Corax's ideals of uplifting humanity, and they're known to actually interact with the people of their homeworlds, and they have close ties unlike most chapters. This includes training the PDF, helping to organize defenses, and training people in their shadow tactics. This also serves a dual purpose as, along with building rapport, they strengthen the world's defenses and prime the people for recruitment. Finally, though, for their warfare and war gear, the Raven Guard famously prefer to wear the Mark VI Corvus armor. It's even named after their Primarch since the 19th Legion tested it out in the Great Crusade. The armor had lighter protection, but featured quieter servos, better sensors, and was overall more agile. It also had an appropriately bird-like beaked helmet. And in the modern era, the Primaris Raven Guard prefers the lighter Phobos variant of the Mark X Tacticus armor. Oh, and kinda random, but they also live in a haunted mansion. And that's only somewhat of a joke. Their fortress monastery, the Ravenspire, is full of cobwebs, spooky corridors, and is theorized to be possessed by something. Be it ghosts of the fallen ravens or an ancient machine spirit, there definitely is something roaming the halls, opening doors, moving stuff, and the cries of the fallen can be heard periodically echoing throughout the fortress.
Specifically, the failed Marines cry out from the Gene Lab every year. The secret lab is hidden and guarded by the First Company. Interesting. That's... Hmm. This is truly an interesting legion. So, how does that work exactly? Like, does that mean that their souls are also like, are they all just psychically in tune with their gene seed? Like, is anyone like injected with their gene seed just become naturally more psychically in tune? Like, are they all just subtle psychers that are able to lightly manipulate the world around them through the warp? That'd be interesting. That would make sense how they're able to stealth around as much, as easily, and as well as they do. I have no idea.
Fortress. And finally, their chapter master is the legendary Ultra Chad K. Van Trike. Woo!
What a name.
Former chapter master. He has since given up his title to Shadow Captain Athon Shan so that he can focus more on what he does best, being super hella cool and killing shit, rather than
Ah,
managing a chapter. Which is honestly kind of based, and Shan
yeah.
looks super cool. But anyways, this section was brief because I want to make a dedicated video on Shrike since I really like him. His models are super cool and some of my favorites. His Primaris version might just be my favorite Primaris model of all time, but that's the Raven Guard, and I really like them. My homebrew chapter's even a Raven Guard successor. But I love that they're a
Hmm.
relatively smart and reasonable chapter, but they also aren't above doing a badass Lightning Claw jump pack assault from time to time. Plus, I also really like their spooky and emo aesthetic, and Korax and his son's depressed nature, in contrast to their determination to destroy tyrants and better humanity, is actually pretty inspiring and wholesome. As long as you overlook the fact that they free planets of tyrants and then put them under Imperial rule. I personally like to imagine that they just feel super happy about liberating a
Also, they're going off of Corax's logic. The Chaos and the most Xeno species are the ultimate tyrants as they fight for power and dominion. Then Corax left before the Imperium really spiraled into super mega evil corrupt version it is in the present. Not to say that the Emperor was normally good, morally good, just by Corax's point of view, he wasn't a tyrant, so by the time he disappeared, he wouldn't have taught his legion to oppose the tyranny of the current Imperium's high lords and elites. And additionally, it makes narrative sense for the Raven Guard to actually delude themselves into believing themselves liberators while being the hand of an oppressive system. Yeah, I mean, like, that's ultimately the interesting spice and flavor with this setting is that there's no such thing as a morally good or morally correct faction. And anyone who tries to attempt to make one has to at least give it some shade of gray because otherwise it just kind of stands out. You know, looking at the Tau again on that one, everyone criticizes the Tau for being a little too optimistic, a little too morally good or perhaps righteous in that sense, considering that, you know, their well to do way of wanting to incorporate other species, kind of treat people a bit more fairly than most is something that a lot of people take umbrage with. And the fact that they also don't have a very established sort of like a dark sort of backstory kind of sets them apart from most factions. But I think the fact that they're still like new additions to the setting, quite literally and also figuratively, like the fact that they only just became like a space-faring sort of species that made contact with the Imperium and other races and have advanced technologies that rival most other factions within that setting makes them interesting, but at the same time, it also makes them potentially dangerous. You know, like it makes them both interesting and dangerous in equal measure, while simultaneously having an interesting contrast compared to the other factions. I think that while I can understand the criticism of the Tau, I do think that their fall has yet to truly happen, and I think that 40K is what they're going to do with the Tau is that they're going to enact and show us in real time the downfall of the Tau Empire rather than have it be talked about in some form and fashion. It might become like a literal story within the tabletop game for all we know. I mean, like, it could actually serve a plot relevant thing for the town to actually suffer their own downfall rather than, you know, it just be something that's just talked about in the lore. But yeah, moving on. Let's just let the video finish.
Planet, and then the Imperium immediately does their evil ass evilisms after the Raven Guard leave, and the Bird Boys are just unaware. But yeah, super cool, underrated chapter. Let me know what you think of the Raven Guard in the comments below. You already know I like him, and Corax is probably one of my top Primarchs, but I'd love to see what you have to say. And again, big thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Be sure to click the link in the description, incogni.com/crackduck, and use promo code CRACKDUCK to get 60% off on the annual plan. But anyways, thank you for watching, and big thanks to the patrons who support the channel. You're all very epic. And as always, please like, comment, subscribe, and consider sharing to all your sad emo bird boys. Thanks. Corvus Corax would be so confused seeing the Genestealer cults, other than their little quirk of getting eaten and working for
Warhammer 40k, as you all know.
I'm gonna get to Caiaphas Cain at some point, goddammit. I thought it'd be a nice distraction from Pancreas, considering that I feel like I covered the guy a little too much. But yeah, that was that.
This video is
Then was the Raven Guard, the coolest Marines that no one cares about Warhammer 40k lore by Crackduck. Well, other than that, I think that was a really interesting video. I liked it. I learned a lot about the Raven Guard than I did, and I've learned more about them than I did previously, so that's nice. It's always nice to learn more about these factions because I don't know how they technically operate within the setting. So, it's good. But yeah, I think that the Raven Guard are an interesting faction. I think that, in particular, I think Crackduck's coverage of them and the fact that he likes them so much kind of adds an interesting sort of flair and lens to the video and to the way he talks about them. And I think that there's a lot of things that are great about this Legion. I think that I agree with a lot of Crackduck's appreciation and admiration for this faction because it's, you know, he brings up a lot of interesting ideas and details in here that, you know, make the Raven Guard really stand out or seem pretty cool on the surface. And yeah, I actually kind of am more interested to see more stories about the Raven Guard as well, but, you know, whether or not I'll actually cover them on the channel is going to be a debate, but if, you know, if anybody has any sort of, like, recommendations for reactions, among other things, regarding the Raven Guard, or even other factions, or even, you know, chapters, you know, feel free to let me know. I'm always looking at the comments sections of my videos for anyone who has any sort of, like, new ideas for videos or things to cover. But, yeah, I'll just go ahead and cut it there. Thank you all so much for watching. Please go like and subscribe to the original video. And I hope to see you all in the next video. And hopefully I'll be able to stream at some point. Bye-bye.